Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted France's right-wing leader Marine Le Pen in Moscow today. He and the presidential hopeful discussed building closer ties. Putin said he has no intention to influence the upcoming French election, but in the past, when Le Pen's National Front needed funds, Russia lent the cash. In Italy, another anti-Europe party is getting moral support from within the Kremlin. Matteo Salvini recently traveled to Russia, where he signed a political accord with Putin's party. He says he would rather hitch his wagon to Moscow than to Europe's establishment.
Because they don't have fear, because they were the first to go to Syria to fight ISIS, because they are fighting economic sanctions that don't make sense, which are damaging not only the Russian economy, but the European economy, because they have clear ideas on how to fight terror, deal with illegal immigration, and the future of jobs.
There is also the growing influence in Europe of Russian-backed media outlets like RT and Sputnik, put out in different languages. More murkier allegations of Russia disseminating fake news on social media and hacking here too, which Russia denies.
So what is the goal here? Some observers say that an isolated Russia is simply looking for any friends or allies it can find in Europe. And others say that they think the plan is more sinister and to destabilize, ultimately, Europe.
What does the Kremlin get out of building these kinds of alliances? Well, clearly, they get closer to the ultimate goal, which is to have a paralyzed EU that's incapable of making decisions, an EU that is much more inward-looking.
It seems European politics are fair game for Americans, too. There were widespread reports of individual U.S. citizens backing right-wing candidate Geert Wilders, who recently lost his bid to lead Holland. But at a time when the European Union appears more fragile than ever, on the eve of the 60th anniversary of its inception, Russia's pulling at the edges may have a serious impact. In Milan, Amy Kellogg, Fox News.
Iran striking back. While critics say the Iranian nuclear deal unlocked billions of dollars for the regime in Tehran, they have now slapped sanctions on us, hitting 15 American companies, which Iran claims support terrorism. The firms include ITT, Raytheon, even truck maker Oshkosh, and can you believe this? The real estate company Remax. This after the U.S. announced its latest sanctions on Iran last month. And now Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is set to visit Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday. That means both nations are further cementing ties between Tehran and Moscow. So how worried should we be? John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a Fox's contributor and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. So, Ambassador, what about this partnership between Putin and Rouhani? It seems it's only escalating and that they're getting closer.
Well, I think Russia and Iran have been acting very closely together in the Middle East for the last 10 or more years. Certainly, Russia has repeatedly given political cover to Iran's nuclear weapons program through multiple encounters in the UN Security Council and more broadly. They've worked very closely together to support their mutual ally, the Assad regime in Syria. In fact, I think it's pretty clear that if it weren't for Russia and Iran and Hezbollah, the Shiite terrorist group in Lebanon, basically supported by Iran, that Assad would have fallen years ago. So I think this meeting really underlines the strength of the relationship that already exists. There are other possible areas of cooperation here, both Russia and Iran, big oil and gas exporters. I think in many ways Russia would love to find a way to get together with OPEC, or at least parts of OPEC, so that they could collude together in when to restrict production and raise international oil prices. They've got a lot to talk about, and I think the center of the conversation is how to continue to minimize American influence in the Middle East.
Minimize American influence in the Middle East. Look, Russia is using an Iranian airbase in Syria. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was in Moscow the other week trying to rein in the Iranian proxies and the Iranian forces in Syria. Did it work? Will it work? Is Putin listening? While Hezbollah is, tens of thousands of missiles on the Israeli border.
Right, and that's why, for example, just within the past couple of weeks, Israel has struck again inside Syria to prevent further weapons transfers to Hezbollah in Lebanon. From Israel's point of view, the growth of Russian influence is nothing if not very troubling and destabilizing. Look, our policy, U.S. policy and Israel's for 50 years has been to keep Moscow as minimally involved in the Middle East as possible. And under the Obama administration, Russia is now back selling weapons to Egypt. It has military advisors there it hasn't had since the mid-1970s. It now has a completely new air base at Latakia in Syria. As you mentioned, they're cooperating more closely with Iran than before. They've supplied Iran with the very sophisticated S-300 air defense system to protect Iran's nuclear program from an Israeli strike. And this cooperation is broadening and deepening in many, many respects. And I think it's one reason why it will be difficult, if not impossible, for the United States to cooperate with Russia on counterterrorism measures, because Iran, as you know, is the central banker of international terrorism. It finances and arms Islamic terrorism, whether they're Sunni or Shia, and really is at the heart of a terrorist network around the world.
It is still on the #1 on the state sponsor list of state sponsors of terrorism. Finally, Ambassador, what should the Trump administration do? Clearly, Vladimir Putin is expanding his reach in the Middle East at our expense.
Well, I think we ought to make it very clear that we're not going to accept that, and we're certainly not going to accept an enhanced role for Iran in the region. That's why, #1, as the Pentagon reviews the military options to destroy ISIS in Syria and Iraq, it ought to do so in a way that rolls ISIS up as quickly as possible, but which minimizes the upside for Iran. Obviously, in any multi-party conflict like this, eliminating one party, eliminating ISIS, will benefit everybody else. But we ought to try and do this in a way that benefits Iran as little as possible, because the next conflict is already underway. You can ask the Gulf Arabs, Egypt, Jordan, you can ask the Israelis. They see Iran as the principal threat, and we should too.
Iran is the principal threat, says John Bolton. Ambassador, thank you for your insight today. As always, good to see you.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.
Police are still on the hunt for a suspect in a Cincinnati nightclub shooting that killed one 27-year-old and left 15 others injured. Mike Tobin is on the ground in Ohio, where we are just learning more about what caused the gunfire and the investigation. Hi, Mike. What can you tell us?
Hi there, Elizabeth. You've got an environment here that was going to be chock full of witnesses by its very nature. So you have the 16 people who were shot. One person is dead. And you have dozens and dozens of witnesses. But the challenge for police is to try to make some order out of the chaos that ensued immediately when the gunfire erupted. The witnesses went everywhere. Presumably, they've got security video they can track down, and they can start talking to people and start identifying these gunmen if they haven't identified them already. The gunmen are still at large. The one thing the police chief and the mayor have been very public about is that they do not think this is an act of terrorism. These are a couple of people who had a dispute between themselves and an apparent indifference to life.
It's important for everyone to understand that people were just going to have a good time and ended up getting shot. That is totally unacceptable.
Now, the Cameo nightclub here is one that caters to young people. There have been shootings here in the past. New Year's Eve 2015, there was a shooting in the club. A couple months later, there was a shooting out here in the parking lot. As a result, they did employ security. They had people wanded as they went into the front door. What's unclear right now is how the gunmen, who've yet to be identified, were able to get their weapons past the security and the wands at the very front of the club. It should be noted that the one person who passed away was only 27 years old. There's one other individual who's said to be in extremely critical condition, so sadly, we could see the number of fatalities rise out here. Elizabeth?
That's right. Very sad. All right. Great reporting, Mike. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, President Trump getting a real good feel of what the swamp really is, and the health care bill stalls before a vote.
That's right. Here to weigh in, Fox News contributor and the host of a new show coming soon, The Next Revolution with Steve Hilton. Steve, you're also the CEO of CrowdPack and the former director for strategy of British Prime Minister David Cameron. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. You know a lot about unlikely outcomes. The key, though, of The Next Revolution is what happens next. So you get elected or you have Brexit. Yeah. What can you actually get done? What lessons have you learned that can apply for President Trump at this moment?
Well, I think that he's got to really put all his energy into fulfilling that promise, because when you think about that
argument, drain the swamp, that's such a powerful part of his campaign. There are many different aspects to it, actually. Look, he said in the campaign that Washington was completely broken and corrupt and useless, and he's gone there and basically proved it. So now he's got the chance to really use that, actually, use this setback to really give power to that message. Now, the swamp is many things. In a way, we need a map of the swamp, because one part of it is the lobbyists and all the lobbying that goes on, and he's already acted on that by putting in a ban on people in the federal government going to lobby. But there's other parts of it too. There's the federal bureaucracy, all those bureaucrats who are there year after year, regardless of who's in government. They've got their own agenda. I saw that when I was working in the government in the UK. In the end, there's only one way to deal with that. You've actually got to get in there and fire them. That is a really tough job, because you've got lots of rules and that stop you from doing that. So he's got to get on with that. You've also got Congress itself, as we saw this week. The money that goes into politics, the donations, all the behind-the-scenes wheeler dealing, that means that the people who actually we elect don't necessarily represent us. Now, I think that's the second thing, is that he's got to get in there and say to Congress, look, I was elected as a populist to get things done for the American people, just like your earlier discussion was focusing on, and basically say to them, I don't care what you think or what your donors think, this is what we're going to do.
Sure. All right, Steve, real quickly, I want to get your thoughts on Al Gore is making some interesting comments lately. He's saying that climate change is the reason behind Brexit and the recent Trump victory. Really curious to your thoughts on that.
It's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I can't help but laugh every time you say Al Gore said something. You know it's going to end in a bit of a joke. Now, look, the reason Brexit passed was because the British people wanted to take back control over their country, their laws, and their borders. It had nothing to do with climate change, and it's the same reason that people here voted for Trump. They want big change, and climate change has got nothing to do with it.
But doesn't that just show you how it's sort of like Democrats are from Mars and Republicans are from Venus? I mean, if they're pointing to climate change for ISIS and Brexit, where does that conversation converge?
I know, and it just shows that actually, funnily enough, it comes back to our early discussion. There's a lot of big donors that shovel money to Democrats who are obsessed with climate change. And in order to please those donors, they keep saying this stuff, even though everyone can see it's completely ridiculous.
So if we tackle climate change, then ISIS goes away.
There you go.
Okay.
You nailed it.
Solving all the world's problems this morning. Stephen Hilton, good to have you here.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
As London dealt with a deadly terror attack outside Parliament this week, leaders of 68 nations met here in Washington to assess their strategy to destroy ISIS or Daesh. And we sat down for an exclusive interview with one of the leaders of the war on terror, the Prime Minister of Iraq, Haider al-Abadi. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Welcome to you.
Let's start with the terror attack in London, which at the very least appears to be ISIS-inspired. What are your thoughts about what Europe, the U.S., the West can do to prevent these kinds of attacks?
I think at the moment we are at a very important juncture where Daesh is on the retreat. We in Iraq has been killing Daesh, removing them from our land, and we are killing their aim, so that recruits are at minimal at the moment. So what they're trying to do now, they're trying to attract more recruits by doing these acts, criminal acts. We should be focused, we should be concentrated to remove this ugly, dangerous terrorist organization.
But you're saying that the success in the Middle East is spawning these attacks in the West?
Yeah, for simple reason. It's like somebody is dying who's trying just to flex his muscle at the last moment. So the only way forward is to kill their hope, just to finish them. Then they will not have any hope to commit such criminal acts.
In your meetings this week with President Trump, with the summit of nations that's fighting ISIS, was there any agreement on a new strategy to fight and destroy ISIS in the Middle East?
I don't think there's a final version of us agreeing on like a plan, but I've seen that there is commitment from the U.S., especially from the administration, and of course from Congress, to continue to support Iraq and to continue to stay focused on eliminating Daesh.
President Trump, at various points over the last year, has talked about having a secret plan to defeat ISIS. Did he share that with you?
Well, I don't think he'll share it if it's secret. But I think my belief, as I understood, that plan is not ready yet. It is still in its draft format. and still is not there.
How close in Iraq, in Syria, how close is ISIS to defeat?
Well, in Iraq is there. I think the defeat is sure, is definite. We'll finish the job in a very short time. It is within reach.
By when?
Within the next few weeks.
Within the next few weeks, ISIS will be gone from Iraq?
Yes, militarily. We are defeating them militarily. As a terrorist organization, as I said before, they will try. So that's where we need the efforts of others to flush them out in Syria and other places.
There are now 5,000 U.S. troops in Iraq, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford, talks about wanting to keep troops in your country for a long time.
We have, as has NATO, begun a dialogue about a long-term commitment to grow the capacity, maintain the capacity of Iraqi security forces, but no decisions have been made yet.
How many U.S. troops do you want in Iraq, and for how long?
We are concentrating on training, logistical support, and intelligence cooperation and gathering. These are three important elements which I think we need some U.S. troops to stay in Iraq to continue the task.
So if we now have 5,000 troops there to complete the kind of mission you're talking about, to train and assist, how many U.S. troops will you need?
I think much less than the existing ones. Of course, with the war done, the task required will be much less than at present. So we'll be looking at a lower number than the existing.
1,000?
I think it's a bit more. Fighting terrorism is a priority for us, and should be a priority for everybody. I know it's a priority for the United States, but we should be on the same chapter on this.
I want to follow up on that. Do you see a difference between President Trump's determination to destroy ISIS and President Obama's?
I can see a very powerful determination to defeat Daesh.
But more determination with President Trump than President Obama.
Well, yes, I can see that determination. President Obama didn't want to get involved in the first place. He just wanted to forget Iraq. And I think coming back to Iraq was sort of imposed on him because of Daesh, what they have done by crossing the Syrian-Iraqi border and occupied about 40% of Iraqi land, slaughtering people. So there was a lot of pressure on President Obama to come to the help of Iraq. Well, I think at the moment there is understanding that Iraq is an ally, and we should keep on working with Iraq to support Iraq to stand against terrorists.
During the campaign, and even as president, Mr. Trump has talked about taking Iraq's oil as a way to repay the U.S. for all the money we have spent in your country.
The old expression, to the victor belong the spoils. You remember I always used to say, keep the oil. So we should have kept the oil. But, okay. Maybe you'll have another chance.
One, what do you think of that? And two, did you tell the president directly in your meeting?
Yes, I did. I told Mr. President, Iraqi oil is for Iraqis. There is no question about that.
Did it upset you that he was suggesting that the U.S. could take your oil?
Of course, it upsets every Iraqi. It upsets every citizen. I don't think one should say that. This is a wealth of the country, the wealth of the people. There's no right for any foreign country to take over the wealth of another country.
One of the reasons that you came to Washington is because you would like continued U.S. support as you try to rebuild Iraq after the war, after the attack by ISIS. But President Trump announced in his new budget that he's cutting foreign aid by 30%.
We are not begging. We have been fighting on the ground, fighting ISIL, Daesh, with our own blood, with our own sacrifices. And this is a danger to the whole world. But we need much more to win the peace rather than winning the war, after winning the war. And this, I think, is a responsibility of all our partners. It shouldn't be just thrown on Iraq.
The IED in Afghanistan took one Marine's legs, but the terrorist bomb could not take his desire to serve. After learning to walk again, he decided to put on a different uniform, not interview, my bad. And as they say, soldier on. Brian Yennis with us from New York, and with a story that is unique in so many ways. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Leland. Well, Marine veteran Matias Ferreira is now believed to be the first double amputee police officer in the U.S. Ferreira lost both of his legs during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. On the night of January 21st, 2011, Ferreira, serving as a machine gunner, jumped off the roof of a building and landed on a 30-pound improvised explosive device. Both legs had to be amputated below the knees, and he suffered a broken pelvis and shattered femur. But that did not stop Matias. Within just 3 months, he was walking again, and now he is a police officer in Suffolk County, New York. On Friday, Matias graduated from the police academy. Ferreira completed 29 weeks of training. There were no special waivers. He passed all the physical requirements. The 28-year-old starts this upcoming week.
To me, that word hero is usually tossed around pretty easily. I wouldn't call myself a hero. I have a lot of friends that didn't make it back home, and when I speak to their families, like, that to me is a hero. Somebody who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Somebody who's gave up everything they have, you know, for others. That to me is like really the definition of hero. So for me, I'm just your ordinary guy who is given a second chance at life and, you know, able to, you know, give back to the community and give back to those who helped me, really.
Ferreira says his wife, Tiffany, and his 2-year-old daughter are what keep him going. The veteran moved to the U.S. from Uruguay when he was just 6 years old, and he had wanted to serve since then. His colleagues were so inspired by him, they made him class president.
I'll say something.
He not only passed the academy with flying colors, but he was a leader for this recruit class during this process. And those characteristics that allowed him to achieve those successes are exactly the characteristics that we want in our police officers.
And just 2 years ago, Ferreira made headlines when he saved a baby from a burning vehicle. You know what they say, once a Marine, always a Marine. Leland?
Yeah, and one we can be very proud of, perhaps one that the service can be very proud of right now as the Marines go through a, shall we say, difficult time. Brian Yennis in New York. Brian, thank you.